just as I learned that I could take all the meaning out of life, I later learned that I could imbue my life with meaning. And one way of doing that is by doing things that help other people. Another is by not choosing not to do certain things, choosing to be in a monogamous relationship or choosing not to eat certain foods. People say, oh, that, you must feel so deprived, not eating all these foods. I'm sure you hear that all the time. But, there's a reason why all spiritual paths just about, have, religions have dietary guidelines, and, one, you can eat this, but not that, or certain days of the week, or certain months of the year, or certain times of day. And I think whatever the intrinsic benefit of eating or not eating certain foods, just the act of choosing not to eat something that you otherwise can eat makes those choices meaningful. Or being in a monogamous relationship, is that like the ball and chain? Well, it can be. Or is that, the crucible where you create this sacred space where you can only be intimate to the degree you feel you can be open your heart and be vulnerable, and you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. So if you have people who are totally committed, they can open their hearts more and more. The more intimate it is, the more erotic it is, the more playful, the more fun, the more healing, all the things that really matter to people. And so in all of these areas, what it comes down to is what you gain is so much more than what you give up. Not just about preventing something bad from happening years down the road. That's not sustainable. Fear is not really a sustainable motivator. I mean, for a month or two, it can really get your attention, but it's not sustainable. What's sustainable are joy and pleasure and love and feeling good. And so for me, my work, and which is, it gets me out of bed every day, is to feel like I can work with people who are suffering, just like I was. And when they're suffering, there's an openness to change that you don't usually find, because change is hard. But if you're hurting badly enough, and you can say to someone, look, here's something you can do that can make the pain, whether it's the chest pain, the angina, or the more deeper pain, the depression or so on, that can really make a difference. And how, because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, how quickly you can experience those benefits. And then they come out of your own experience, not because some doctor or some book or some whatever told you, but like, oh, when I do this, I feel good. When I do that, I don't feel so good. So let me do more of this and less of that. That really makes it sustainable. And so for me, the reason that I've spent so much of my adult life doing these studies, and they're really hard to do, is that properly done and with the right collaborators and published in the leading journals and so on, they can redefine what's possible. And by doing so, it can give, at this point, literally millions of people new hope and new choices when they're hurting the most, and they're the most open to change. Where the doorway, people say things like their suffering has been a doorway for transforming their lives. And it's an opportunity that, as a doctor, I wasn't really trained to do. I was trained to kill and bypass pain rather than to use that as a doorway.
Yeah. I have to say, I can relate to that so much from anorexia. When I was coming through that, I really had a desire to not be restrictive about anything in my life ever again. That was kind of the goal. And as I moved over to whole food plants and veganism, so many people said, that's going to get you sick again. You're restrictive. And I just got to say it felt the exact opposite, because I was now leading with my heart, and 5 times a day or 6 times a day, sitting down to eat, it was like this joy was bursting out of me. And I was the one that was in control of that and creating that space for my heart. And yeah, never looked back, obviously.
That's beautiful.
Really relate to.
So much of anorexia, as I understand it, way more about this than I do, is about control, and so much about life in general. When I see people say, honey, you're not supposed to eat that, they immediately want to do the opposite. It goes back to the first dietary intervention, when God said, don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well. And that was God talking.
And it was Eve's fault, so
that's
really.
Right. So, I just found that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And so the idea of doing these studies and this podcast really is just, to me, awareness is the first step in healing. So I appreciate the chance to share this information.
Yeah.
Can we dive a little more specifically into the lifestyle changes that you suggest to work with people? You've distilled it, as Dotsie mentioned in the intro, in your latest book, Undo It, into 4 tenets: eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. But could we go more specifically? Because I've heard people say, oh, his program is too restrictive. And so, and we're talking about how it actually opens you up. So can you talk more specifically, eat well? What is the definition of that, and moving more?
Yeah, the Undo It book that, as you mentioned, I co-authored with my wife, Anne, and partner, we've been working together for 24, 25 years now, um, begins with one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein, which is, if you can't describe it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so we kind of reduced it down to its essence, eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Steve Jobs was one of my closest friends for many decades, and he mastered that idea, with the iPhone. He would often say to me that he was more proud of what he left out of it than what he put in it. It's like supercomputer, but the interface is so friendly that, a 3-year-old can pick it up and use it. And so we tried to make the book like that too, that it was so easy. So the Eat Well is basically, if you're trying to reverse a disease, it's more prescriptive. It's the pound of cure, if you will, as opposed to the ounce of prevention. If you're just trying to stay healthy, lose a few pounds, what matters most is your overall way of eating, living. So if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad or there are all these languages that have this kind of fascist quality to them. Once you call foods good or bad, it's a small step to saying I'm a bad person because I eat bad food. And at that point, might as well just bring out the cheeseburger because you're a bad person, right? But if you're trying to reverse a disease, it is hard. Again, that's why we were able to show that for the first time for so many of these different conditions, because most people didn't go far enough. So it's essentially a whole foods, plant-based diet. It's essentially a vegan diet. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products, as close to possible as they come in nature. It's low in fat, but it's also very low in refined carbohydrates and concentrated sweeteners like sugar and high fructose corn syrup and so on. But as you know, within those, you can eat, whenever you want. You can eat until you're hungry. You don't limit the amount of food, just the type of food. And still people lose weight and they come down to what they weighed in high school or college, if that's what their ideal body weight was, and they level off. It works really well. The move more is, exercise. And for me to talk to you about exercise would be like, me talking to Michael Jordan about how to play basketball, or Steph Curry. But it's basically, what it comes down to for me is, if you like it, you'll do it. So pick a kind of exercise you enjoy. And for me, I grew up in Texas where, running was always the preferred form of punishment. Go take a lap, or give me 50 push-ups, or whatever. But swimming was always fun. And so we moved into a house a couple of years ago that actually has a lap pool, and it's heated, which is such a great luxury. So I've been swimming every morning because it feels like fun for me, as opposed to, I don't have to motivate myself to do it. It's just, fun. So pick something you enjoy or incorporate it into your life. I used to get frustrated when I couldn't find a parking place near the gym. I thought, well, this is ridiculous, so I parked deliberately farther away, those kinds of things. And so it's both aerobic and some resistance training. The stress less is various stretching, breathing, meditation techniques derived from yoga, but we do it in whatever form is comfortable for you. It can be religious, it can be secular. But it's more than stress management. It's about, again, quieting down our mind and body enough to experience that inner sense of peace and joy and well-being that's always there. And also to experience our own inner wisdom, our own inner teacher, our own inner guru or inner God, or whatever you want to call it. It's that little voice that, wakes me up at 3 a.m. and says, hey, Dean, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest, or here's something you really ought to think about. And I've learned that I can access that more intentionally and directly when I can quiet down my mind well enough to hear it, because it speaks very clearly, but very quietly. It gets drowned out so easily. So at the end of a meditation, I have gotten in the habit of always asking my voice to say hello to me, and I'll say hello back. And I'll say, what am I not paying attention to that I need to? And listen, and it'll tell me. In fact, all of the ideas for doing the studies, including the most recent study on reversing Alzheimer's, which we can talk about more in a moment, came from listening to that voice. So the stress less is not just managing stress better, but rediscovering our own inner sense of peace and joy and well-being and inner wisdom. And the love more is the part that people often have the hardest time with initially. They say, okay, I get the exercise, and of course you got to eat. It's just a question of what, but love more, that sounds so touchy-feely. And I'd get really defensive, and I'd say, oh no, look, this is hard science. Look at our, quantitative arteriograms and cardiac positron emission tomography and radionuclide ventriculography and spectral and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I say, you know what? It is touchy-feely. And that's why it works so well, because we are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. That's how we've survived as a species, is to learn to love and take care of each other. And that's part of what concerns me today as things get so polarized and divisive, is that, that's really how we've survived as a species, is to learn to love and take care of each other. But to me, the real pandemic isn't just, COVID-19 or heart disease or type 2 diabetes. It's loneliness and depression and isolation, which I certainly understand from my prior experiences we talked about earlier. But also, with the breakdown of the social networks that used to provide people a sense of love and connection and community, 40 or 50 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people who grew up together. They had a job that felt secure, that they were, at for 10 years or more, got to know their coworkers. They went to these places called offices, they weren't doing it all by Zoom. There was a church or synagogue or mosque or club or something they went to regularly where they connected with people. And today, many people don't have any of those. And one of the studies that Ann and I cite in our new book, and the Undo It book, is that the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are. And well, why is that? It's because it's not an authentic intimacy. It's like, it looks like everybody has this perfect life but you. It's like, here I am in front of the Eiffel Tower with my beautiful kids, and here I am, whatever. And people don't post their demons and their darkness and so on. Whereas if you grow up in an extended family with 2 or 3 generations of people, they really know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile or, the nice things you said about me when we introduced me. They know when you messed up. They know when you were suicidally depressed, or when you got busted, or when you, whatever, broke that window, or, and that they know, and they know that that they know, and they're still there for you. And there's something very primal about, I see you, like in James Cameron's, wonderful film Avatar, which is really from an African proverb, I see all of you. And to be seen in all of you, not just your good stuff, and still be loved and accepted, is profoundly healing.
Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.